Morning, everyone. Mr. Polyev the other day, and this is October 12th, today is the 19th, came out with this: Parliament needs an anti-corruption committee. And I have to ask, is this the strategy? And if it's the strategy, I'm not on board with this. I think it's a losing strategy. I think if the Conservatives pull this stuff from the Ethics Commission and the Ethics Committee and the Finance Committee, then they lose. They're barreling into this, and the Liberals are loving it, right? They're loving it. They're all over it. Liberals propose special committee to examine pandemic-related spending. Special committee, not called the Anti-Corruption Committee, right? Let's change that name. So say the Liberals, I'm sure. But here's Mr. Polyev talking about this. And then we're going to see Ms. Rempel playing for the same thing, for the same documents. She wants documents to tell her blah, blah, blah. I don't think holding the government accountable, especially at this level, why would you believe these people? Why would you believe the Liberals? Why? There's no reason to believe them. And if you want... you have to start making deals with the NDP to get them to take this government down, or you have to start hammering the NDP and shaming them for propping up this lying government. I don't think this is going to work. Anyway, here's Polyev.
Scandal could distract Parliament from the pandemic response. This is a perfect solution to that. We propose that the Finance Committee do finance work, that the Ethics Committee continue its review of privacy legislation, that all the other committees do the policy work that they are set up to do, while a new and temporary committee that is devoted to fighting corruption be established to get to the truth in the WE scandal.
Right. And so in doing so, you lose all your leverage. You would remove it from the day-to-day business of governance, and thereby you'd put it on a shelf. And as soon as this COVID thing's dealt with, right? And that's never going to happen. It's not going to happen because the Liberals aren't going to let it happen. The minority Liberal government is attempting to preempt opposition efforts to create a special committee to investigate alleged corruption by proposing its own special committee to examine billions of dollars of COVID-19 pandemic-related spending. The proposal is aimed at trying to break the impasse over the WE charity after that has bogged down two House of Commons committees in marathon meetings for the past 2 weeks because the Liberals have been filibustering it. A Conservative motion to create a Liberal anti-corruption committee to investigate the WE fiasco and other alleged unethical conduct during the pandemic is slated for debate at a vote next week. Government House Leader Pablo Rodriguez would not rule out Friday, declaring that vote a test of confidence in the minority government. That's an interesting piece of speculation. They back it up here with, they say he dodged the question, right? So I don't know that they'd be making this a confidence vote. However, that would be an interesting little bit of chess, right? If you don't agree with removing, he's going to come up with a counter proposal, and the counter proposal is going to be a committee that's not named Anti-Corruption Committee to examine the spending. And then the NDP is going to go along with that if they want to continue supporting this corrupt government. And I don't see any reason why they wouldn't at this point in time. Because, like I said, you're playing a game, right? You're not necessarily looking at governing for the people at this point. They are playing a power game, and the NDP are more powerful now, and they have no money. They can't afford an election. There are other factors other than what's best for the constituents and what's best for the country. The NDP can't afford an election. They just can't. Sorry. And maybe they could do a fundraising whatever in the next couple of years, but I think we're going to be seeing the same song. Like, they're going to say, oh, because of COVID and people not donating, we don't have as much money, and then we're going to create... The Conservatives removed House of Commons money from other parties years ago. The Harper Conservatives did it. I think we'll probably see a return to that through CURB and universal basic income and job creation and all sorts of stuff. I think that the slippery slope. Anyway, back to this. This could be a risky move, making it a confidence vote, given that all three main opposition parties have expressed support for the idea of a special committee that could take over the investigation of the WE affair and look into the other alleged scandals. Rodriguez's counter-proposal would empower a special committee to scrutinize all government spending during the pandemic, including but not exclusively the WE affair, and anything else opposition parties deem troubling. Rodriguez said he'd been discussing the proposal with his opposition counterparts and has not yet secured the support of at least one party, which the Liberals would need to proceed with their proposal and to survive a possible confidence vote on the Conservative motion. But I'm confident that they want to do exactly what we want to do, serious work in a serious committee, he said in an interview, like the Finance Committee and the Ethics Committee, where you've stonewalled for 12 or 15 hours, 24 hours if you look at both committees. like they believe that their own words, I think sometimes, but their actions are not reflective of their words. What they say and what they do are different, right? We're focused on doing serious work in a serious committee, except if you're looking at getting those documents unredacted, in which case we have to create a special committee and then hammer out the details, and maybe it's a confidence vote. Right? Like, you see how crazy this is, right? We want to do serious work and get to the bottom of this, but we've got to govern for COVID-19. But this whole thing stems from the bad governance from COVID-19. So if you want to get back to governing for COVID-19, show what you did before, where we think there's a problem, and you won't show us anything, right? You see how, and I think the Conservatives are going to lose. Like I said, Toro, right? Toro. They're going to run right through. Reasonable special committee, right? Sure. Rodriguez dodged when asked if the vote on the Conservative motion will be considered a confidence matter, saying that the only thing he's focusing on at the moment is his own proposal for a reasonable special committee. The NDP did not immediately respond to a request for comment. The NDP has proposed its own motion calling for a special committee to scrutinize pandemic-related spending, but in the context of what it calls troubling allegations of misuse of public funds. Who gets to name the committee? I bet you it'll be the NDP. The NDP will propose committee, investigating the Liberals for their potential malfeasance or something like that, some long-winded thing. And the Conservatives will say yes, and then the NDP will get a win. Here's the Conservatives' health critic, Michelle Rempel, and she's doing exactly the same thing, trying to get documents, trying to use a committee to do it. I'll just show you the first, 15 seconds. Most people are blocked from her. I'm blocked from her too.
The Standing Committee on Health to study this issue and force the government to make public documents that detail why Canada's pandemic early warning system was shut down, who got over $1 billion of PPE contracts, where that PPE is, or if it's been delivered, why the government relied on advice from the World Health Organization when it's become clear that that advice might have to do more with politics rather than sound public health data, why Canada doesn't have rapid testing capacity, and when rapid tests will be widely available to Canadians, and why a former Liberal MP got a sole source contract to build ventilators.
So that was Blacklock's reporter who reported that one. The ex-MP's firm wins a contract for ventilators that are not approved in any jurisdiction to date. So they don't know how to make ventilators. They're not approved yet. And the Trudeau Liberals have refused to disclose the names of 41 companies that received government contracts for pandemic supplies worth more than $1 billion. So just like another $1 billion just poof, gone. And it's our taxpayer dollars. And what is our health minister focused on? What is she focused on? She's focused on electric vehicles. Electric vehicles are the future of clean, reliable transport, and we're making Canada the place to build them, creating stable middle-class jobs and a greener economy. I wonder if she made this image here. Oh, it loaded quick. It was very small. How many kilobytes was that? Ooh, very small, very small. Good job, Miss Haydu. But really, it's very interesting that our health minister is so focused on that when there are quite a lot of other things to be focused on, especially considering the $1 billion of companies for PPE. That would be under the health minister's purview, would it not? And the laundry list of things that Michelle Rempel is reading here. But again, I don't know that I like this strategy of let's use committees to investigate this. I don't know you're going to get any kind of cooperation from the Liberals, and wasting time in committee. Well, I mean, is it a waste of time? The RCMP and the police should be called if there's criminality, and I feel like that's being ignored too. There has been oversteps, there has been cronyism, there has been backroom deals, and there's nothing happening about this, right? Obstruction of justice, right? Lots of public things where other people, prosecutors, people who work in law say, well, other people have been put in jail for less. And then, the attorney general gets shuffled in the cabinet, right, over to Lametti. Very, very interesting stuff. But is this how we want, is this what we want our health minister to focus on? And is this how we want our Conservative opposition to focus on dealing with these issues, right? Yikes. Here is a 1,000-person people attending Vancouver mega freedom rally. Incredibly reckless, Vancouver councillor says. This is October 18th. And here is somebody giving some perspective. Here's a June Black Lives Matter Antifa protest. Mayor of Vancouver. The fear, pain, anger, and outrage many of our neighbors are feeling today and every day, right? So it's a positive. I'll show you the story. It's a positive protest story, like get out there and protest, right? Thousands gather for peaceful anti-racism rally in Vancouver, right? But if you're protesting lockdowns or anything they disagree with, it's terribly irresponsible, right? Awful and terribly, incredibly reckless, right? Just, there is a narrative. If you are marching to a different drum, then they've already loaded people with the words they need to ignore you and marginalize you. It's very, very, very jarring. If you're gathering for George Floyd, no problem, no virus in sight. But if you're gathering for anti-lockdown, or if you're saying that Doug Ford or Justin Trudeau or any of these people are not behaving in, or Twitter aren't behaving in the public interest or the public good, then that is a problem, right? Sky News is reporting Twitter removes tweet from White House COVID-19 advisor Dr. Scott Atlas saying masks don't work. Here's Scott Atlas's tweet that got removed, and I believe that he's still under Twitter arrest. His account, last I saw, it was locked, but it says masks work. No. LA, Miami, Hawaii, Alabama, France, Philippines, United Kingdom, Spain, Israel, WHO, widespread use, not supported, and many harms. I don't know how to say that. Despite decades of considerable uncertainty, revalue, CDC may no significant reduction in influenza transmission. Learn why, and he's got a link. And they removed it. It removed him for that. No longer available, right? Wah, wah. So, and somebody took the picture because they knew that was going to happen. Very interesting, right? Here's Toronto Star. Aaron O'Toole is taking potshots at Doug Ford's COVID management strategy. Conservative leader Aaron O'Toole took a shot at Ontario Premier Doug Ford's government management of pandemic restrictions Saturday while praising Alberta Premier Jason Kenney's less restrictive approach to managing the spread of COVID-19. This seems like, I don't know. I don't live in Alberta, so I don't know exactly what the restrictions look like in Ontario. I think that they're very restrictive for a lot of the population from Toronto, Peel, York, and Ottawa. I think that represents, I read somewhere that represents 43% of the population of Ontario in that grouping. And they're under lockdown where restaurants, bars, nightclubs are closed. I don't think this is helpful. I don't think this works at all, especially in light of the fact that the rules are inconsistent and don't seem to make sense. Like a mask, as you walk into the restaurant, you sit down, you can take your mask off. Again, I'm not advocating for masks all the time. I'm saying as soon as you take a mask off, you're exposed to the environment and therefore they're exposed to you. Like the things that we believe, despite the evidence, is just unbelievable. So, and I don't know what to make of, so I think that the lockdowns are too draconian in Ontario, and I don't think they're necessary based on the evidence that the states that have opened up and the countries that have opened up that have not had lockdowns or mandatory masks, and they're doing just fine, from what I've seen anyway. And so I don't know what to make of Kenney. I don't know what to make. Well, O'Toole, I think he's tacking center, just like Andrew Scheer did, right? So this is interesting, him attacking Ford. That's an interesting development. Like, is Ford too close to Trudeau? This is a weird kind of, like the opposition federal party is fighting over Doug Ford. It's a very strange thing, right? Because Trudeau's now, and Ford is saying, oh, Freeland's great and Trudeau's great, and Aaron O'Toole's attacking Ford. Like, is Ford just going to march the entire Conservative Party and say, you know what, we're the Conservative Liberal Party, and, hold up Del Duca's hand or something? Who knows? The world's gone mad. Here's further. Restaurants implement locals only dining policy, right? Locals only dining policy. Right now you have to give your phone number and your name, and do you have to show a driver's license or something to show that you live in the place where you want to dine, right? Like, usually restaurants serve people who are away from home, right? And I know more and more people go out to restaurants near home. They have favorite restaurants they go to close to home, but like a lot of the time restaurants are used because you're far from home, right? Here's Ottawa Public Health, and it says this is a great Hallowise idea, whatever. Winston Smith says Ottawa Public Health, does not follow data. They recently asked bars and restaurants to be closed, citing fear of outbreaks resulting from these venues. Actual outbreaks related to COVID-19 deaths nationwide, long-term care facilities, food and drink retail. And this was September 9th. So I wanted to show you this. I'll get me out of the way. Hold on. And I'll show you the source as well. This is September 9th. So food, drink, and retail had total number of reported deaths, 1. And I found the updated chart. Now, I don't know if the updated chart looks different. Oh no, the deaths are the same. So from September 9th, you can see the date at the bottom, to October 3rd, I think that is, October 4th, you can see the date at the bottom of the chart if you're watching. You can see that on the left-hand side of the chart, the outbreak setting is community, corrections, food, drink, retail, healthcare, industrial, long-term care, and retirement. And I'll tell you the totals. Total number of deaths in community, 26, food, drink, retail, 1, healthcare, 236, long-term care, 6,862. And again, this is kind of baseball statistics, right? But outbreaks in the past 7 days for food, drink, retail is 72. And previously the outbreaks, we don't have previous outbreak data. I was gonna do a comparison about, before this was the number, but I was looking at the deaths. They added an extra. Anyway, if you want to see the original source, I've got the Canada.ca link in my tweet here, and that'll be in the description. But fundamentally, we're locked down. We're locked down for these numbers. 1 death in restaurants and food, drink, and retail, and the destruction of how many businesses, right? Like this is nobody's messing around here. Like this is not to be trifled with, right? Here's the full report. Businesses that survived the first lockdown may not survive the second lockdown. This is the second wave that they're talking about. Number of international travel related to COVID-19 cases and data. They have to blow up the chart because it's minuscule, right? Like I understand there's more to the picture, but goodness me, there is, if we're talking about second waves and talking about data-driven policy creation, I'll bring me back, I didn't realize I was not back, data-driven policy creation, then what are our leaders, our leaders are missing a whole lot of important data, right? 805 cases, 939, 712 for 10 deaths, 5 deaths, 9 deaths, right? Like every death is a tragedy, but goodness me, there are a lot, people die every day. A lot of people die every day for lots of different reasons. And I'm not saying that that's a good thing. I'm just saying that that's the world we live in. And you cannot demand safety from a government that can't possibly promise that, because you're far more likely to just die of being in a car accident than COVID-19 just based on the numbers. It's frustrating. Here's Michael Parsa, and Michael Parsa is, who's Michael Parsa? MPP for Aurora, Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill, and parliamentary assistant to the president of the Treasury Board. He says, effective October 19th, we are protecting residents and staff by pausing short-term and temporary absences and non-essential visitors from long-term care homes in York Region, a new area of higher community spread. Pause? A pause? Here's an image of seniors saying they'd rather die of COVID than of loneliness. Yeah, like that's happening. That's in Ontario. I think it's funny too. 21 hours ago, so this tweet was sent on 20 hours ago. Okay, 21 hours ago, it says, Ontario women, on Persons Day, we honor and reflect on the important historical milestones women have made in the fight for gender equality and recognize the shortfalls as we push forward so that all women's voices are heard. Her voice is not being heard, right? Is this, like, we're sitting here trying to celebrate gender equality while we lock up our seniors with no recourse. Do they have a parole board they can talk to, right? Like, this is their home. They should be able to go out and leave if they want to. And I understand that there are complicating factors. I understand there are extra factors. Is it more complicating factors than like living in a condo unit, right? Like people live in apartment buildings and you don't have to check with your neighbors if they feel safe if you go out, right? Like, why is the freedom of this class of person so freely given, so invaluable, so cast away, not thought about, right? Like these people have rights. They're locked in their long-term care homes because it's for your safety. It's for your safety. Is that a good enough excuse? I'm sorry, but it's not even a little bit. And somebody said they can leave, but then they won't be allowed to come back unless they quarantine for 14 days if they leave, right? Sick or not. So, and I'm glad people are telling me, because if they're locked in there and they can't leave, that's one thing. If they can leave, but they have consequences, I mean, that's another thing that serves to chill anybody's, oh, well, you can leave, but not functionally, not really, right? If you leave, you're quarantining for 14 days, right? Like, man, it seems cruel is what it seems, doesn't it? Here's Anthony Fury, and he says, despite the fears, back to school in Canada is going just fine. I said the same yesterday. My kids have gone to school, and my kids are in school today, and they're fine. They're not. Everybody got sick. I had a conversation with somebody at the bus stop this morning. I said, don't you find it strange that most of the kids were wearing masks, and like by most, everybody but my kids were wearing masks. And the school got sick. The kids got sick. And I said, like, doesn't that make your brain tickle? It makes my brain tickle. It makes me think, how can you think that masks work? I don't understand. Like, we all wore masks and we all got sick, and masks work. 2 + 2 = 8. We missed a step somewhere. And I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to be, trying to engage people, because you got to talk about things. And if I'm wrong, I'd rather be aware that I'm wrong. But like when I read the efficacy, the science on the efficacy of masks, and it says the model says that without the masks, we'd have 25% more cases. I'm sorry, man, that's not science. That is absolutely not good enough science to discount all of the science I've seen up to now. So, and I don't know if I get not angry or whatever. If people talk with me, I like to talk with them, and I assume that we're in the same mental space, in that, like, I'm open to hearing information, but it's got to be information that meets a certain bar, right? Like, people don't want to actually have an exchange of ideas. They want to tell you what they think, and they don't want to listen to your side. And maybe I'm guilty of that too. I'm certainly not above it, because that's how people talk. You try to tell your story, right? That's kind of our job. We're storytelling people. Anyway, my kids are in school, and I disagree with people. And it's fine. We're allowed to disagree. People can believe what they want. I'm just trying to understand their point of view. And when they can't give me anything really to grab hold of, I have a hard time understanding how they believe what they believe. And then the conversation goes off the rails, because I'm like, but how do you... Because what I'm trying to articulate is different than what they're trying to answer. Regardless, back to this. We first heard the news from other parents. The virus had arrived at a school in our neighborhood. It was what parents who opted to send their kids back to school had dreaded ever since classes restarted. Not really. In our case, the school in question sent multiple cases home after a student tested positive. That was over 2 weeks ago. Then, this past Monday, all of the classes resumed. The kids and the teachers all came back, and that's the end of the story. The kids whose positive test had spurred the class shutdowns fully recovered, and no other kids contracted the virus. Stories like this are playing out in schools all across the country. A student or two, or sometimes a staff member, tests positive for COVID-19. Protocols are implemented. There are minimal, if any, spin-off effects, and then life goes on. There are currently 5 schools in Ontario closed due to reported cases, and 451 schools that have reported cases among students or staff. The latter number represents just under 10% of all schools in the province. Just under 10% of the schools. Man, the provincial government keeps a regularly updated list of these schools and the number of cases they're facing. Scrolling through the massive list, mostly a recurring number is 1. That's it, a single case. That said, the numbers do go higher in Quebec, like in Quebec City, where an elementary school closed in September after 20 students and 5 staff members tested positive. What about the more important numbers, hospitalizations and deaths? Back in July, I wrote in a column with the headline, "Let's Stop the Fear-Mongering Over Back to School," that there have been 8,588 Canadians under the age of 20 who have tested positive for COVID-19. Only 125 of those have been hospitalized, and only 1 of them has died. That single death is believed to be the case of a young Toronto girl who tested positive for COVID-19 but did not die from the virus. How have those numbers changed 3 months later? The number of Canadians under 20 who have tested positive has more than doubled to 20,820, making up just under 12% of all Canada's cases. But the total number of hospitalizations has not doubled, having increased to 186 persons, with 41 of them having to go into the ICU. So from 125 hospitalized to 186 people, and I don't have the ventilator numbers, but that's not a huge increase, certainly not double, right? And there was sadly one more death in that age cohort, with the August passing of 19-year-old Montrealer Don Benny. I'm going to get his name terribly wrong, so I apologize, sir. Who is by all accounts a healthy and athletic young man who spent over a week in a medically induced coma before passing away. To put this into perspective, as 4 doctors noted in a recent guest column in The Sun, influenza claimed the lives of 10 children in Canada under the age of 10 during the 2018 and 19 flu season. Things are without a doubt not as bad as many parents initially feared and were led to believe. Why is that? It's probably because of a number of facts. The protocols in place at our school and broader society have likely played a role as well, increasing hand washing, physical distancing, and indoor mask wearing. No. Maybe the hand washing. The hand washing before eating, massive, makes a big difference. Kids still got sick with respiratory stuff. back to this. Canadian teachers deserve a shout out. He says they have done a fantastic job keeping our kids safe and happy while shielding them from the level of alarm and anxiety that was out there about the back to school experience. Teachers face an added level of stress and also now have extra duties to grapple with, but they're rising to the challenge and making it work. While many teachers' unions are still undermining confidence in the system by insisting that classrooms aren't safe until a list of their demands are met, experience has proven them mostly wrong. What we haven't had enough of, though, is much needed words of reassurance that things are so far going just fine and the kids are going to be all right. Of course they are, unless you make them germaphobes, right? Like terrified of their own shadows. It's very, and the teachers' unions are irresponsible in the ads that they're running. Kids listen to the radio and it's just terrible. The stuff that comes on the radio all the time. I turn on the radio and I turn it off as quickly as I turn it on because between the songs is these ominous COVID warnings. And it's just like, it's dystopian. This is not keeping anybody safe. It is like a post-apocalyptic world where like the worst thing in the world has happened, but it's a flu. Like it is a flu. There are doctors saying this is a flu. It is not as impactful as the 2018-19 flu season on children, right? Like 10 children were impacted and killed by the 2018-19 flu season, according to this article. Just off the top of my head, I don't want to do more research than that currently, but when you look at those numbers, did you think once about sending your kids to school during the 2018-19 flu season? Not once. Not once was I concerned about it. Not once. And maybe we're foolish to believe that we're above illness like that. But I think you're foolish, even more foolish, to destroy our economy because of an illness that's less bad than the 2018-19 flu season on children, right? Like, could you think of another way to deal with businesses? No, and you know what? I don't want to play the game of finding some way where you're playing this. The measures are whatever when you see an outbreak or whatever in a restaurant or something like that, and you have to do protocols and blah 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 blah. I don't want to play that game. That is a BS game. Look at these numbers. These numbers do not justify the lockdowns and the pantomime that our leaders are going through, and it is very, very concerning. Okay, moving out of COVID. Vancouver currently offers free parking to veterans in the weeks leading up to Remembrance Day. Starting 2021, the city suggests limiting it to November 11th, statutory holidays. Heartless and evil. Hot Mic NDP star caught mocking Indigenous candidate's name. Nathan Cullen was an MP under the Trudeau Liberals, I guess. I didn't realize he lost his seat. BC NDP candidate Nathan Cullen has come under fire after Hot Mic caught him mocking an Indigenous candidate. The Stickine, sorry, I've got that terribly wrong, candidate was caught making this comment during an all-candidates debate over Zoom, so he was on a hot mic. Yeah, very interesting. I thought this was interesting. Cullen is already considered a controversial candidate as he seemingly violated the NDP's equity policy to become the candidate for Stickina. In the NDP mandate, the party emphasizes an equity policy, essentially stating that a riding nomination must go to a member of a marginalized group if there is a straight white male in contention. In this case, Cullen was seen as a star candidate by John Horgan, as Cullen previously served as MP for Skeena, Berkeley Valley. MP is a member of parliament, MPP would be member of provincial parliament, right? So he's in the BC election to be an MPP after presumably losing his Liberal seat. Interesting, right? He's being, I don't know if he'll get elected. There's too much going against him right now, but that's interesting to know, right? Here's some spending news, and we're going long today. Jagmeet Singh says, a Prime Day reminder that Jeff Bezos is a prime example of a pandemic profiteer. He has increased his worth by an excess of $97 billion on the backs of workers and Canadians. All while Justin Trudeau has allowed Amazon to pay zero in taxes, it's time the ultra-rich pay their fair share. We've seen this tweet before. The reason I'm showing it to you is here's a list of the rest of the billionaires and the difference that their billions have increased over the recent pandemic, right? So we've got Wealth in Billions March 18th, Wealth in Billions September 14th, and the change in billions. So the change for the Thompson family, $8.8 billion up. The Joseph Tsai family, I believe, that's $4.5 billion up. The Weston family, $1.6 billion up. Let's see, James Irving's up by $2.1 billion. Those are the Eastern oil guys, right? And there's a whole other list here, right? So there's lots of billionaires that have made a lot of money. It's interesting that Jagmeet Singh doesn't mention any of those guys, right? Charles Bronfman, there he is, 0.0. He hasn't been pandemic profiteering, right? Those Bronfmans are safe from that. Just don't deal with Nexium. Don't talk about that. Ooh, scary, scary stuff. This is the graph I was looking for yesterday. So the Bank of Canada, the Reserve Bank of Australia, the Federal Reserve, Bank of Japan, Swiss National Bank, European Central Bank, balance sheet assets to nominal GDP year-over-year growth. So Canada's up 456% year-over-year from 2019, and like look at the just the departure from the previous years with regards to nominal GDP year-over-year growth, or balance sheet assets to growth. That's wild, right? That's incredibly big. Here is the reason I was showing this was yesterday. Mark Gerritsen, he was talking about no money being printed, and Brian Lilly engaged with him. So he says, I'll tell you this first, and then we'll come back to the MP Mark Gerritsen, so member of Parliament for Kingston. This is kind of funny. So Brian Lilly says, this man is part of the government. He's right that no money is printed. It's digitized. Bank of Canada is engaged in quantitative easing and asset purchases to give more money to government. It's clear Mark Gerritsen understands far less than he claims. And Mr. Lilly links to the Bank of Canada. And the Bank of Canada says, here's the Bank of Canada maintains committed to current level of policy rate, continues program of quantitative easing. Quantitative easing. We're going to come back to this in a minute. Well, I'll read it and then I'll read it again. The Bank of Canada today maintained its target for the overnight rate at the effective lower bound of 0.25%. The bank rate is corresponding 0.5% and the deposit rate is 0.25%. The bank is also continuing its quantitative easing program with large-scale asset purchases of at least $5 billion per week of Government of Canada bonds. So the government is buying its own bonds. What is quantitative easing? Just in case you're not finance-minded, like I'm not, here's quantitative easing from Investopedia. Key takeaways. Quantitative easing is a form of money policy used by central banks as a method of quickly increasing the domestic money supply and spurring economic money. In simple terms, printing money. Making more money available. Printing money, right? Increasing the domestic money supply. Okay. Understanding quantitative easing. Increasing the supply of money lowers the cost of money, the same effect as increasing the supply of any other asset in the market. A lower cost of money leads to lower interest rates. When interest rates are lower, banks can lend with easier terms. Quantitative easing is typically implemented when interest rates are approaching zero because at this point, central banks have fewer tools to influence economic growth. So you can't make money any cheaper because you have 0% interest. So you have to make it more attractive for banks to loan, right? So to give them tools to spur lending. Back to this. Special considerations. Things to think about. I wonder if Ms. Freeland's read this page maybe a couple times. It's dog-eared in her How to Be the Finance Minister for Dummies book. Left over from Marno's days. The Will Ferrell skits, right? Okay, if central banks increase the money supply, it can create inflation. The worst possible scenario for a central bank is that quantitative easing strategy may cause inflation without the intended economic growth. An economic situation where there is inflation but no economic growth is called stagflation. Although most central banks are created by their country's governments and have some regulatory oversight, they cannot force banks in their country to increase their lending activities. Similarly, central banks cannot force borrowers to seek loans and invest. If the increased money supply created by quantitative easing does not work its way through the banks and into the economy, quantitative easing may not be effective except as a tool to facilitate deficit spending. Interesting, right? Another potentially negative consequence of quantitative easing is that it can devalue the domestic currency. While a devalued currency can help domestic manufacturers because exported goods are cheaper in the global market, and this may help stimulate growth, a falling currency value makes imports more expensive. This can increase the cost of production and consumer price levels. Have you been to the grocery store lately? Okay, so now I'll read this again. The bank is also continuing its quantitative easing program with a large-scale asset purchase of at least $5 billion per week of the Government of Canada bonds. So they're printing money at the rate of $5 billion a week to keep the interest rates low, to spur investment, to keep the party going, because without that, the whole thing crashes and you get stagflation, right? Money being printed because money, they're not going to stop buying Canadian bonds. The quantitative easing won't stop, but the investments aren't resulting in the growth of the economy like you hoped, right? So back to the Liberal MP, he says, except no money's been printed. Wrongly, that leads to inflation. There's a difference between printing money and borrowing money. One actually devalues the money, the other doesn't. Printing money is primarily used as a fiscal tool, not to borrow. Econ 101. And then, Brian Lilly responded, and it's not here. So hold on, let me find it. All right, that's the reply was the tweet that I just read, and Mr. Garrettson's response is, "Geesh, Brian Lilly. For starters, I'm just incredibly flattered that you spent so much time talking about me on this topic. Google's highlight does a pretty good job explaining it, but if you prefer, I can dig up one of my old econ textbooks for further reference." It's funny how he's talking down his nose at him, like Mr. Garrettson is like schooling him, Econ 101, like that's the first like introduction to economics, right? And yeah, I mean, I'm a layman, but I'm pretty sure that says quantitative easing is buying $5 billion per week of Canadian bonds. And the whole purpose of that is to facilitate stimulate economic growth. And if it fails, we'll see deflation and all sorts of terrible things. Anyway, Brian Lilly responds, "Not my point, Mark. Just like you talking down to fellow MPs, you also do it to average citizens. Your arrogance is astounding. Printing money is also a colloquial term, which is how the person engaging with you used it. The Bank of Canada actions with quantitative easing and asset purchases are extraordinary." Yes, they are. And that's why I wanted this chart here to illustrate how extraordinary we were. We're quite a ways away from normal, and even a ways away from what the other countries have done, right? Like quite a lot, right? Have a look at the graph if you're interested. Link is in the description. So that's the end of that interaction as far as I could tell. It's kind of difficult. Twitter doesn't make it easy to follow interactions like that, but that's interesting to note, isn't it? The International Monetary Chief says much more decisive action needed to deal with debt problems. This is about poor countries and having debt forgiveness. I thought it was going to be about Canada, but they don't mention Canada at all. So that's interesting to note. I'm not going to read it now because I'm long and well, that's really it. As Canadians huddled at home, feds found meager support for Green Recovery Plan. Yeah, international federal government polling from June, just released to Global News through access to information, shows that the spread of COVID-19 was the most important thing on most voters' minds as summer approached, regardless of gender, age, or income, where those Canadians lived. But the polling also told the Trudeau government two other things. There appeared to be little appetite for an economic recovery plan that placed a high priority on quickly transforming to a carbon-neutral economy, and voters appeared to have little concern about the mounting deficits and debt. I wonder why. Could it be because their elected officials have zero understanding on what they're doing? And then misinform their constituents while they're trying to be held accountable on Twitter? Could be. Just speculation. Who knows? You know how all businesses in China belong to the government of China fundamentally? Like if the government of China wants the records for, I don't know, some business, some airline business, let's say, they could just walk in and say, like, give it to us, or, problems. And I suppose they could do that in Canada too, but Canada's thinking of just buying a stake in Canadian Airlines. Canada isn't ruling out taking a stake in Canadian Airlines, right? So got to prop up those companies and then just buy them up when they're cheap, right? The Ford government is planning on making businesses pay for recycling. Why not just scrap it? Businesses used to pay for recycling in that they would use bottles and then the bottles would be returnable and you could get a deposit and all of that other fun stuff. I think realizing that recycling and then sending garbage around the world on barges is not a great idea. It took a long time to realize this, but we can fix this problem without saddling business with more expense and regulation. Why would you start a brick and mortar business right now? Like what possible incentive could you have to do that? Just wild, just crazy. Last story for this morning, and I know I'm long, so sorry about that. Gangsters using curb to buy guns protect turf. Sources. Yeah, I mean, I don't like unnamed sources, but the gun crime in Toronto is crazy. And it's not rural farmers. It's not legal gun orders reselling their restricted firearms, their restricted handguns to criminal underbodies. No, that's not the word I'm looking for. Underlings, whatever. Criminal people. These are illegal firearms. They're coming across the leaky border that we've had for quite a long time. And the policies that are being created by, again, the three levels of government, the provincial, the municipal, and the federal, make zero sense because they don't address anything that has to do with the illegal gun crime or the acquisition of illegal guns, legal gun crime, and the acquisition of illegal guns coming across the border, etc. And there's lots of holes. There's lots of holes in the policy, etc. But again, it doesn't seem like anybody in our government wants to talk about real issues. They want to decriminalize things that were formerly criminal. They want to vilify people for being racist, and they want to find racism wherever it is, except if it's blatantly being propagated by the people steering the equity committee, or steering the equity steering committee. Right, Upper Grand District School Board? So it's funny, right? It's funny, except that it's terribly, terribly disturbing, because the problems are real and the people in charge of fixing them are choosing to not, right? Instead, they're choosing to focus on, racism and other non-problems. So very interesting times we live in. That's it for me today. Thanks for watching, everybody. Check out CanadaPoly.com, check out CanadaReport.co, and have a wonderful, wonderful day.